A week later, he was like, yo, so Nvidia just gave us a final offer. They like want us to sign. Like I was pre-med up until like halfway through college. Around like 4 p.m., like Jensen walked into their room, like the conference room that we're in. And he starts like handing out like these Taiwanese candy to all of us. And like if you think of the world like clay, like I should definitely be able to leave my imprints on it and then be that as my legacy. What better way to do that than as an entrepreneur?
So let's start with, so what have you been up to for the last year? How's life been? Just a high level.
It's been quite a year. Actually, 1 year ago today is when I first talked to Brev for the first time when I was the founder of Agora. So in the last year, I would say my life has like completely just changed, you know, for the better. So 1 year ago, I was in Austin, finishing up senior year at UT Austin, working on Agora with like two of my best friends. And we had just launched our MVP. We were like starting to scale some users onto it. And our biggest competitor at the time was the startup in San Francisco called Brev. And they're our biggest competitor, right? So my like co-founder, CTO, his name is Tom. He signed up for the Brev like website and like for the platform using his like Agora Labs email, which is like our company email. And the CEO of Brev saw it and was like, who is this guy? Like Agora Labs, like what is this? And so he goes to agoralabs.io and he sees that our platform is like very, very similar to what his is. He always makes a joke about this, but like he actually reached out because he just wanted to see if there's any way to work together. But we started tweaking. We thought, we were like, why is our biggest competitor like trying to reach out to us? Like he's trying to play some mind games with us. Like what is going on? So actually 1 year ago today is the anniversary of like that first call when we first met. 5-10 minutes in, like we were just chatting, talking about like how we kind of see the space or whatever. And he was like, can we just acquire you guys? Like, do you guys just want to join our team? Like, can we, you know, literally buy your IP, buy your company out, and can you guys just join our team immediately? Like, we need you guys on the team. So it was very interesting sort of just like moment that happened then because like we were just so locked in on like, all right, here's our roadmap, here's what we're going to do, here's our plan. But then these guys, we had always seen them as like, they're growing so fast. They were in San Francisco. They had really good presence we were a developer tool, so they get really good presence with developers. So that was like a pinnacle, like literally 1 year ago today. From there, we moved to San Francisco about like a week and a half later. I remember the deal closed down really fast. We negotiated. It was pretty fair on both sides. So we just went ahead, moved to SF. So I left UT, took a leave of absence during senior year, and then literally was just heads down from like, I would say February till like June-ish. Like Brev was pretty heavily in like the scaling phase. We were constantly just churning out, just like you saw the Olama stuff. We're like constantly churning out new content, new notebooks, how to like use GPUs for like different AI ML tasks. And then around like May or June, I think like Nvidia had like kind of approached us because Nvidia was our first enterprise contract. And they were using our service to like help their developers adopt their SDKs, libraries, etc. And so they had started reaching out to us where they were like, hey, instead of like extending like this enterprise contract, like maybe we should just acquire you guys and like purchase the company. And so I think that started hitting up around like May or June. And Nader handled a lot of those negotiations. And then come July 1st, like we started working at Nvidia. So if you think about it, from like February 1st to July 1st, I had gotten acquired like twice last year, which is pretty insane, right? And then July 1st onwards, I've been working at Nvidia since then. I've basically been like the product manager for like Brev, but also just working at a big company. There's so much other stuff going on. So like now I work across like AI agents. I even do a little bit of work in like robotic simulation now. And then of course my day job is still working on Brev as product manager. But yeah, that's how the last year has been. It's been a pretty wild ride, but I would say this has been like the most growth for sure. And I would say definitely the most humbling year as well of my life too. Because as many ups as there have been, there have definitely been some downs here and there. But that's what makes it so special. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's insane. I mean people just to be acquired once is like pretty ridiculous, but to be acquired twice back to back, especially by a little company called Nvidia who's going through like probably the most explosive growth a company's ever gone through. That's pretty crazy. I mean, so I guess let's zoom out. I want to go into like Agora Labs. Like, what was the story there? How did you guys initially conceive of the idea of Agora Labs, and like, what was it? At like a high level.
Yeah, 100%. So me and my friends Ishan and Tom had been tinkering around with like this idea of like building a startup for some time now. I would say the first time we really sat down and thought about it was like November 2022. Back then, we were like pretty involved in like the blockchain space. And you know, like blockchain, crypto, like that's kind of like cryptography was like the basis of like blockchain. But crypto became just like the actual coin, like cryptocurrency. And so if you think about the blockchain space, you think about like sort of like the cryptocurrencies moving around, but we were more fascinated with like the underlying blockchain technology because basically if you think about it, blockchain is like the shared way to like have a shared record of like some piece of information or piece of data. And the most common use case for that is money. But we were like, okay, we saw GPT-4 come out like a month before that. And we were like, holy cow, like GPT-4 is really good. There will be a time and age where like this AI models will be able to like, beat CAPTCHAs. Like it's kind of a no-brainer. Like there's no way you can prove that you're like human or AI anymore online because like at that point, like GPT-4 is definitely able to beat CAPTCHAs, which is the only way. So we're like, there has to be a whole new way to like kind of figure out how to prove that you're human online. So that led us down like the startup journey. So we went down this rabbit hole of like using like the blockchain to like store your like driver license credential on it and then securely share that whenever you like go to any website online. So you think of it as like, you know how you sign in with Google on like all the login pages? You'd be able to sign in with like a different button, which would be our startup. And that would like share from the blockchain proof that you are like human because it has your driver license stored on it. And then it securely shares that proof to be like, all right, Laith and Omeed are human. Maybe Anish isn't. So let's not let Anish join because even though he's a bot, he might have been the CAPTCHA, but he definitely can't pass this. And then Omeed and Laith, let's let them actually like use the website. So it was a really cool, just like technical idea. We were learning so much about how to go through it. We joined an accelerator. We even tried pitching VCs, but I think it became very apparent and clear to us that like one, nobody was willing to pay for this issue, even though they said it was a cool problem. So that taught us the importance of like solve for like a burning problem, not like a nice to have problem. So like the analogy there is like you want to like create like an aspirin, right? Like if you have a headache, you really need to take like ibuprofen or Advil or like aspirin to get rid of the headache. But this is more like a vitamin where it's like, okay, I'll like take it whenever I remember to take it, but it's not like a burning need for me right now. And that taught us the value of like building something where like people had like a burning need for the problem. So we were going through this like accelerator for startups, I would say summer 2023. And in that summer, everyone there was like talking about like, generative AI, like fine tuning models, like running models locally, like this sort of stuff. And if you, to run all these models where there's like an explosion of parameters that you need to run them, you need like something called GPUs. And I'm like, what are GPUs? Like, I thought they were for gaming. Like, you can use them for AI. And actually, it turns out like Nvidia GPUs are meant for AI, but they have a subsection of consumer GPUs that are meant for gaming. So, anyways, all I can hear about is how these startups are like begging for like GPUs. They're like, dude, I can't get GPUs anywhere. It's a huge shortage right now. What's going on? But we were so deep in the blockchain place that we found out about this like peer-to-peer marketplace of GPUs on the blockchain that just had a bunch of them just sitting, laying idle, like collecting dust literally. So when I mean peer-to-peer, I literally mean like an Airbnb style model of like GPU renting. So let's say I own a data center and only like 30% of my GPU is being used. That 70% is just sitting idle, right? And I have no way of like selling that to like people who might be interested unless I know them directly. So they just list it on like this marketplace. And this marketplace is based on the blockchain to store records and like be able to pay for these GPUs with crypto, et cetera, et cetera. But like the fact of the matter is they had GPUs just laying idle. So the aha moment for us was like all these startups, there's this demand for needing GPUs. There's obviously this rise of AI and it's not going to fucking stop anytime soon. But also at the same time, you have all these GPUs laying idle on this peer-to-peer marketplace. And it's there's like low-key, there's more than we realize. There's tons of these GPUs just laying around. So it's almost this balance of like, we need to figure out how to connect the supply to the demand. We know where it is. Can we help build an infrastructure to like surface those GPUs? And then can we build like a platform on top to help like these AI ML developers or these startup founders who need these GPUs to actually use them? So at the core of it, Agora was just a GPU marketplace that aggregated GPUs from like all these peer-to-peer marketplaces. We call them distributed compute. And on top of that, we built a platform so ML developers and AI developers could come in and host models or train models or do whatever it took to get off the ground. So that was like in essence kind of what Agora Labs was and how I kind of got taken there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I guess you were talking about differentiating between like the burning ideas and then kind of like the ideas that are more supplemental. You guys had that entire startup community around you. Everyone's talking about GPUs, how much they need them. I guess for you guys, what was the main selling point of like firstly knowing that it was like achievable? Because obviously, I mean, I've worked in research, Omeed's also worked in research. So being GPU poor is kind of like an accepted thing. If you work on like a Google Colab document, you kind of just are used to just like running out of like, GPUs and then just like running it locally or just like waiting. So for you guys, like how did you guys kind of know that this was like the breakthrough that you guys could specifically solve?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we didn't know, right? And I think that's the kind of like the thing with startups is you have to take that leap of faith. Frankly, we were underqualified. To be frank, like I was pre-med up until like halfway through college. And then after that, I was like kind of unsure what route I was going to go. So like I did not have like the background or like the knowledge to like build a GPU startup, to be honest. I think what became very clear is like we literally thought about it from first principles. There's all this demand for this problem. Like if we figure out how to build this product and like really learn and dig in, we could actually surface this demand. And so it's like it's kind of a no-brainer. We see this opportunity and it feels like other people don't. Like at the worst, we just like have GPUs to do for our own development. And at best, we actually build a service and product on top. And so I think like there was never a moment where it was like, holy shoot, like holy shit, like I think this is going to be like a game changing idea. It's going to be $1 billion. But I think there's always some sort of potential there. And so we just started chasing down that rabbit hole. And as we started exploring more and more, like the idea became bigger and bigger and became more solidified. As we started talking to more people to validate that problem, like you said, researchers or like startup founders who are like GPU poor, they're like, damn, you guys have A100s for like this price and you have them available actually? Like, this is insane. Like, I'm stuck on Colab with the T4 and I hit out of memory errors all the time. Like, what you guys would do would be a huge game changer for me. So hearing that problem get validated over and over again was really, really powerful. Actually, a mistake we did was we just didn't actually sprint into talking to customers. We were just like building. And I think that was useful for just like learning about the space because we were kind of like new to it and learning about how this all worked. But I think if we had sprinted to talking to customers even earlier than we had, I think it would have been even better. But obviously, we just took that idea that we had, the initial hypothesis, tested as much as we can, started like building out like prototyping and like building on top of this like brand new sort of like paradigm. And I think like the checkboxes started taking themselves off. And I think it became like a no brainer probably a couple of weeks in that it was like, okay, like AI is here to stay. There's a couple of core theses we have, like you can talk about Moore's law and Javon's paradox and all these things where like the rising exponential demand for compute is not going to cease anytime soon with the advent of like Gen AI, especially being more and more GPU hungry. So it's like this space is not going away anytime soon. We know we have this unique insight into it. Let's use that unique insight to like carve our own little piece of the pie and build Agora out.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was the, I guess, like the initial series of prototyping that you guys were doing? Like, what did the first like MVP kind of look like? And I guess for you, it seems like there's like two things going on here, right? You have to build a technical product that everyone kind of needs to validate and test, but then there's also like outreach. So you guys obviously needed to run this and like have a bunch of people test, break it, whatever. So Agora Labs, I guess prior to you guys getting acquired, what was the first sort of product? Like, what did it look like? And then how are you guys kind of doing like outreach? Who are you guys talking to?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. And so I always say this, I always said this at the time, even to my co-founders, but like for me, like my mindset was all just like product and distribution, right? So you can build a product, right? But if it sits and doesn't, get anyone to use it, then it's like useless. But if you don't have the product that's usable or even like can get their mind share, then it's very hard to go out and go to distribution too. So they kind of go hand in hand for like just overall growth. So at the time, like we obviously had this hypothesis of like, hey, there's all these GPUs sitting on like these blockchain marketplaces and these distributed compute data centers, but nobody's using them. So at first we had to validate whether they're even usable, right? So what we had done is like using that infra, we built up like the ability to like fine tune the new Meta Llama model that just come out, Llama 2.7b. And we were trying to figure out, can we actually use these GPUs from this marketplace to actually do that? And if we can, then that's like good enough. Like we call it proof of life of NVIDIA, but good enough proof of life of like this idea actually might have some legs behind it. So once we had built that, the next thing we did is just like use those same GPUs and then build like a front end app over it now, where you can actually like SSH into the machine or use Jupyter notebooks, which is like a running service on in that machine, and start using that notebook to like similar to Colab, you have a notebook environment to just start using the GPU for like development. And so that was kind of like the rough sort of like alpha stage MVP. And huge credit to like Tom, my co-founder at the time, while we were all in school and grinding, like I had to write a thesis at the time too. He drove the majority of the work to like getting the alpha MVP out. And that was really huge for us because the product itself didn't look sexy, didn't look valuable, but the aha moment hit for a lot of people. And so at that moment, I was sort of the guy who was focused on like growth, distribution, and like obviously eking out the product to get there. And so I was very focused on like, okay, can I go to different in-person communities within Austin where there might be practitioners? Can I go hunt them down and be like, hey, do you have GPU compute problems? Like, can I come help you with that? And then secondhandly, it was like online too, like constantly posting, writing blogs, putting out resources to make sure people who are like looking online could actually like find out about like Agora. And during that time, I also studied how like our competitors were doing sort of outreach and distribution. And like that's where they had these really awesome resources they're putting out around how you can use the GPUs on their platform to, fine tune a new model on their Apple Notes, or set up your own like image creation model pipeline, like these kind of things. So I learned a lot from just looking at competitors, looking at how other people in the space did it. And I started to learn a lot about something like developer relations. So it starts like reach out to even researchers at UT. Obviously, like you said, researchers are very like GPU poor. So they seem like the perfect market to get like this cheaper sort of GPU compute that was a lot more available and feasible to them. So it was a combination of just like developer relations, going in person to events in Austin, reaching out to researchers. I even put up flyers all around Cockerel, like in the ECE building. And I was just putting up flyers like, hey, like I got really cheap GPUs, even free ones. Like hit me up. And I had like 60 people fill out this form, giving me feedback, telling me like, and I feel so bad, but I even was like, I'll add like a $10 Amazon gift card at the end. And I think I never actually ended up doing that. But like, point being is like, I was just so scrappy to find any way to like get people to like, one, see my idea, two, find some value in it. And if they didn't find value in it, at least explain to me why. So I can go back and iterate and like share that back with my co-founders. We can take these learnings to adapt the product. And just a constant process of that led to us like pushing out our full public launch in like January 2024. And that was like maybe 2-3 weeks of that before Brev called and was like, all right, you guys need to keep going. But yeah, that's how the 0 to 1 phase went for us.
So you said for a while, you guys basically had a controlled group that you were like testing this product with. What was that time? So like, how long did you do that before you knew like, okay, this product is good enough that I can now like go to market with it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, honestly, like actually, I think we wanted to stay in that control group for even longer. But I think the number one advice is like if you have something that can be put out there, just put it out there. And even if it breaks, it's actually a good thing because that means people want your product. That means the demand is so high the product can't handle it, and you can go figure out how to scale it. But at the time, we didn't know that, and so we stayed within this control group of like trusted people we knew that like wouldn't get hurt if like the product went down or if like the Jupyter notebook failed or if they lost their work, and they could actually like sit through with us. But actually, we didn't realize till later that we're like we should just put this out there in the world and see what happens. And so for I think about like we had our initial MVP done in like early November. Like I said, it didn't look great. It was not sexy, but it worked. And we took like this boring product and just had like different people like test it. I think we had about like I think 10 to 15 like beta users who were just like constantly testing it out, messing around with it. It's a combination like researchers and people we knew and just homies as well. And then after some time, we're like, okay, we need to give this a huge facelift and just put it out there in the world. Like we're not like I can go out and talk to many people like that, but it only scales linearly if I do that. We need to have like exponential growth. We need to make sure people can use as much as possible, and people just need to come in and get a GPU on their own and see for themselves. So after some time, actually, it was a big sort of like pivot moment in our sort of founder journey where we're like, we just need to put this out in front of people and be okay with being vulnerable and having a product that might suck at the time because we have to trust ourselves to go back and fix it. But that initial feedback of people just using it is so valuable. And so I would say that switch kind of happened in December where we're like, all right, we just need to get this out. We need to get like a public MVP out and we just need as many people using it. And we just need like hyper focus on growth. Because I think our product is good enough to where like we consider to have like parity or like one-to-one features with like Google Colab, which we thought was a really solid start to like, that's when you can start scaling. So like I said, dude, like it was really hard at the time. Like we didn't know what we were doing, frankly. And I think a lot of founders don't. But I think kind of what you have to realize is like, if you have something that does work and has value, the best way to even like prove that is not to keep in a controlled group or echo chamber, but just to let the world see it. And if they shit on your idea, then it's fine, right? At least you learn it and you can take that shit, whatever you got shot on for. So like, then you can take that to go update the product. But if you keep it within closed circles, you never actually go expose yourself. You never actually enter the arena. You never actually get that feedback to go improve later on. So yeah, that was a huge lesson for us and definitely something I'll take moving forward as I continue down the career.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, did you ever have like an incident where someone just like used your product and was just like, yeah, this is complete garbage. I'm gonna be honest with you, it doesn't work at all. Like, did you
Yeah,
ever have that sort of negative feedback?
I actually did. Like I had a ton of times. And it didn't feel good too because I just put like my whole life into that. Like I was sacrificing so much to even like try to get this product up and running. I was a newbie to this, right? So like I had to teach myself what S stage was and I was dealing with all these ML engineers who were like writing out like Slurm scripts to like deploy their jobs into like UT's clusters. So like I was just like learning on the fly with these guys who are obviously way smarter than me in this field, trying to tell them why they should use my product. And they would see it and be like, dude, SageMaker could wipe you guys off within like this. Like, why are you guys even doing this? Like, what are you guys doing? And the fact is, they're not like they're not the ones building this. They're just like researchers. They're just like common users. And so I think what I had to do is like separate myself from the product and be like, okay, they're like objectively criticizing what the product is. And so I have two ways to think about it. I can either get butthurt and like let it hurt my ego, or I can just find a way to like use that criticism and like flip it back and be like, okay, let me come back within a day with a fixed feature or a fixed thing that you wanted to see. And let me go impress you with like that sort of velocity of like, we really care about this problem. Let me make sure that you can still find a way to use this. And even if you don't find value, that's okay. But you just telling me that criticism helped me make the product better for somebody down the line. And so that reversal of mindset took some like development, took some maturity. But over time, I started like, you have to be open to criticism. Like there's no way you can do anything that like, the way I see startups is like, if you are the only person with that insight, people are going to call you crazy until it's not crazy. And so if you do an idea that everyone thinks is a no-brainer, then you're probably late to the idea. You're probably late to the game. You're probably late to the curve. And so whenever you are like early to the curve, people are going to criticize and people aren't going to like see what you're doing and see the value of it, especially when you're early. And that's okay. But you have to like kind of separate and have like thick skin and separate that criticism from like actual growth. And if you use that criticism to like improve and constantly iterate, that's the name of the game actually. And that criticism early on definitely burned, but it actually helped us get into the right place and eventually go on this pathway that we're on now. But if it wasn't for that early criticism, then dude, I don't know if we wouldn't even got anywhere. So actually, I'm so grateful that we had those moments where I had to like get humbled, where I got embarrassed, but then took that to, go learn and become even better later down the line.
That's really cool. Yeah. So one thing I also want to now kind of dig into is transitioning from Agora Labs to Brev. I really want to understand detail of like how that happened and like your emotions as like that transition was happening, the initial talks, the meetings you had to go through. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, dude, it was actually pretty crazy because around the same time we had gotten like 2 other acquisition offers, which is like pretty wild. So in our heads, we're like, we're not going to sell, right? Unless it's like $1 billion, like obviously we'd be dumb not to do that. But we were planning to take the traditional route of like raising a round and then building our MVP, hyperscaling on growth, moving to San Francisco and just going down that pathway. And we were dead set on that. The 2 companies that had like previously reached out to us to acquire, like they were really cool startups for sure and companies for sure. But I think the idea for us was like, obviously they see potential in us, they see value. So like, they see the exact same thing we do. And so I think they're just trying to like see if they can acquire us and just have us work for them. And that was not what we wanted to do. That's not why we started this. We wanted to build like, a scalable $1 billion business. So we kind of just didn't really take that into heed. But we knew about Brev because like I said, when we're focused on growth, focusing on product, focusing on distribution, Brev seemed to just check off all the boxes. And it's always interesting to see things from an outsider perspective, from an insider perspective. But from the outside, Brev looked like they knew exactly what they were doing and they're like firing on all cylinders. Their CEO Nader was just leading the charge in SF. They're hosting hackathons, doing all these things. So when Nader reached out to us, we were like, holy cow, like this is our biggest competitor. They know what they're doing. Maybe they're trying to play mind games with us too. Like this is gonna be a really interesting call. So we go into it pretty nervous, kind of just like what's going on, kind of on our toes. But Nader has like this weird, like sort of like energy to him where he's like actually very inviting, very friendly, and just starts joking as if he knew you for like 10 years already. So that helped like kind of ease us into like this sort of meeting. And then we just like started talking about like how do we see like this problem, right? And so I like led product and just like kind of go to market distribution for like Agora. So kind of like the idea there was like I was just sharing like, hey, we want to get users into a GPU environment as fast as possible. We want to make sure they get value out of this. We don't want to like add any friction along this process. Our goal is to build the best, smoothest platform ever on top of this like this cheap GPUs. Right? It's not about having cheap GPUs just itself. Like we want to have like we want developers to feel happy even using our product, like delighted, honestly. So I remember just saying like kind of all these things off the dome to him, and he was like, "Dude, like this is exactly how we think about things. Like you guys are just such a culture fit for like what we were doing. Like we get along so well. Like, do you guys want to explore like an acquisition?" And at first we were like, I don't know, like I don't know, but like we'll be open to it. But immediately after the call, I remember just taking a sit back and being like, damn, like, what if we did join Brev? Like, what if we did just fly out to San Francisco next week and then just see what happened and like go from there? And it's funny, Nader says this quote, but he's like, don't get married on the first date, right? Like, keep going, keep exploring. Just because you like the person doesn't mean you have to get married eventually. So I think his mindset was like, all right, let's just explore what this could look like. Let's talk about a potential deal. Come to SF and come work with us for a little bit. Let's do some joint work together. And once we go on a couple dates, if we want to get married, we can get married. But like obviously, it looks like we can get married on the first date, right? Like that the potential is there. So he had referenced that, and so we were kind of just like, okay, we have this immediate roadmap. We just launched our MVP about 2-3 weeks ago. do we focus on scaling? Do we kind of shift and focus on this? Like, we kind of had to take a risk. Eventually, we sat down and decided, like, okay, I think Brev could actually be net even more exponential growth than like what we're doing at Agora. We thought it could be the chance to like join something much greater and like a rocket ship that was already flying, and pretty early on too. And that was around the time when Nvidia was about to sign the enterprise contract with Brev. And so that was a really, really interesting place to be in at the time, an interesting place to join the startup at that time. So after a series of like super long just discussions with Tom and Ishan, we were on the phone for hours because Ishan was in New York City, Tom was at Syracuse and like upstate New York. So we're just like remote. So we're just on the phone for like hours on end, just discussing what the different possibilities could look like. And we weren't sure, frankly. Like we were like, are we like shooting ourselves in the foot? Like we had just spent so much time building something from scratch. Like, are we just going to give it up just to like our competitor just because they said so? But at the same time, the other side of the script was like, this is an unreal opportunity to join like a startup as it's about to hit like a scaling phase. And we knew we could immediately bring so much to the table, and they're willing to reward us for it and like give a significant part of the team and also like our of the company, sorry, and also give a significant part of like direction, vision, execution, these sort of things. And so for us, it was like, okay, after spending some time thinking about it, about a week later, we called Natter again. We discussed what a potential deal would look like, signed like some mutual NDAs. And then I would say after Valentine's Day, like I had to make sure I had Valentine's Day with my girlfriend. And after that, we just went straight to New York, or sorry, to SF the next day, February 15th. So we land February 15th. It's like a whole new, I mean, never been to San Francisco before. It was just brand new sort of just feeling of like, wow, like I could feel the energy as soon as I landed, if that even makes sense. Like there's billboards talking about GPUs everywhere. And I'm like, what? Like, that's crazy. Like, that's the sort of energy. You can just feel it, like even landing in SFO. So we just go into the city. Brev, they have like this hacker house that's in like this neighborhood called Hayes Valley. So in there's like 4 other startup founders who are also building their startups. Like it was pretty insane. Our office was this one tiny like living room type beat where like all of us had like 8 desks in like this tiny cramped room, and all like everyone on the Brev team is like around 6 foot or like taller. So like we're all like cramped, like trying to go like this, sit out and figure out where to sit and work. But I remember it being such an interesting, like scrappy feeling, like, wow, like that was so different from like building Agora in terms of the vibe and everything, because I was remote. So I was just sitting in my apartment in West Campus all day, working on these things, talking to UT Austin researchers if I got at the house, or just picking people's brains. But with the SF, it was different. Like everyone there is constantly thinking about this stuff all the time. Like it's a level of obsession that you don't get anywhere else in the world. So that was the big realization for me, was like, I wish I'd been able to get to SF earlier. Obviously we were in college, so it didn't quite make sense until we were done. But like getting to SF as soon as possible, especially for this AI space and what we're doing, was like incredibly valuable. 2, I think like these people just operate at a different pace than what like I could even imagine. Like they just shipped fast. Everything's about velocity. And velocity is actually the name of the game when you're doing start. At least that's what I learned, is like velocity is the name of the game. Like if you're not constantly iterating or constantly moving as fast as possible and constantly on your toes, then like you're gonna fail. You're gonna die, right? Like the way startups die are the way startups die are the same way sharks die. Like if they stop moving, they just literally sink. And so that mentality, I learned that immediately, was like, dude, these guys will ship features out like anything. They'll just sit down on a Friday night, get a glass of wine, and just ship code to like 1 a.m. Like it's insane, sort of just like feeling to see that. So I was just overcome with all these learnings and realizations as soon as I landed, because I was like, wow, like this is so different from like anything I could even imagine. And I thought I was a real startup founder. But all that aside, after joining Brev, it was definitely an interesting transition, because I went from just like a pure founder to like obviously part of the founding team, but I was now kind of like an employee. So understanding the balance of like having to take like agency and ownership to treat Brev like it was my own startup, but also at the same time understand that I didn't have like full 100% sort of control, and it was like kind of a new environment. I had to like learn how to be an employee. It was also a very interesting transition. And I think also like for example, like when you're a founder, like you stay up at night being like, holy cow, like am I going to survive? But as like a founding team member, like yes, you still have the same stresses, but it's not the same. And I think like Nader did an amazing job like helping us like transition into it, but also still get us like that taste of like being founders and like taking that responsibility and understanding what it's like to like scale the business during this time. Like at the same time of acquiring us, he was raising a VC round and he was closing the Nvidia deal. So we immediately had opportunities to kind of come in and help him like navigate this new moment that was also new for him. Like it's not like he had done this before, right? He's also learning how to do this on the fly. So it was a lot of just like learning, being put in a new environment, and like for sure definitely was anxious at first, because I was like, wow, this is all so different. Like there's so much going on. But that sort of transition helped us into like, I don't know, like immediately learning and soaking things like a sponge. And that set us up for like what came down the line for sure. Like those initial 2-3 weeks of just like diving head first, staying up late, shipping fast, like getting assimilated to SF culture definitely was a game changer for how the rest of the year went after that.
Yeah, that's like really cool. So you guys basically did a test trial with them. You guys, simulated the marriage, let's say, and then you guys kind of like worked with them for a few weeks. So you really, there's something about SF that really gets emphasized kind of across the board. I've noticed that Austin's also seeing like a massive growth in like startups and like startup culture here as well. What do you think is like fundamental about like SF and SF culture that's kind of just this optimal environment for startups to grow? And then what do you think, like, I mean, obviously you're from Austin, you went to UT, so what does Austin need to do to catch up? Do you see Austin kind of getting there?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I've thought about this quite a bit because my goal is to stay in Austin if I could after grad, right? That's just where I grew up. It was home. I love UT, love the city. But I think, frankly, there's just something different about Silicon Valley. And actually, I have a book here. There's a book here that Nader gave me, but it's like what the dorm mouse said. And it's about how the semiconductors industry started in Silicon Valley in the 60s and how that eventually led to like what became Silicon Valley and what became like a hotbed of innovation. But basically the book high level talks about how like the semiconductor industry started in like San Jose, Santa Clara area. And from there, like just all of this technology innovation just started bringing capital. And the first VC firm ever was called like Sequoia, right? And they started investing. They created this whole new investing class where you could invest your private capital into these companies' equity, and as it kind of scaled, you have like outsized returns, right? And so you're basically just placing bets on these early stage companies. So from the semiconductor industry, shaped like the personal computing industry, right, with like Microsoft, IBM, etc. And then from there led to like just like the dot-com boom in like the 90s. And from the dot-com boom went to like the app layer, right? And every single stage, like if you trace it back, you can trace it back to the 60s when semiconductors first started in Silicon Valley. And so in all that innovation is like, you can think of it as layers of a stack or layers of a cake. Like they start building on top of each other. And it's only happening in Silicon Valley where it all started. Now add to the top all that, on top of that, you have like fresh infusion of talent coming from Berkeley and Stanford and all these other schools in the area that are constantly feeding into this ecosystem, right? And then you also have the success of like VC, like venture capital investors like Sequoia, which attracted even more capital, even more like LP funding into these like asset streams to like invest into these startups. And eventually you have this perfect concoction of like investors, of ideas and like innovation, and there's like market, and then also like fresh talent constantly coming in. And eventually, like, even if you aren't in the Bay Area, you start getting FOMO. You're like, I have to move there. Like, even if I didn't go to Berkeley or Stanford, even if I'm not a VC investor, or even if I don't have the ideas, like, I want to be a part of that. You kind of just have to go. And so Silicon Valley and especially San Francisco just became ingrained in that for such a long time that it's like such a huge advantage over anywhere else in the world, honestly. So when I think back to what Austin can do, like, I think after 2020, so many people from like Silicon Valley and the Bay Area just started moving to Austin. So we started getting like, shapes and twinges of that. But I think fundamentally, there's like a couple of things that need to happen. One is like straight up, like regulation in Texas needs to be a lot more business friendly. Like straight up, like in California, they have this thing where like non-competes aren't actually like they're voidable, like in court. So you can actually like break a non-compete and just go out and start a startup, right? Like this, like that's like one small example of how like regulation makes it even more friendly to go out and just like start businesses, start a startup, do these things, right? Entrepreneurship. That's one thing. The second is like there needs to be more investment in like talent at like the university layer, right? So this talent that's coming out, like UT Austin has some of the smartest kids I've ever met in my life. Like I'll put them toe to toe with any university, but everyone at UT just ends up going straight to like SWE, Quant, IB, whatever it is, like these classic pathways. Whereas at Stanford and Berkeley, these dudes are always thinking about startup ideas. It's completely different. And they're wired that way because they get a ton of mentorship from the community. They get investment from like, all these VC investors and all these fellowship programs that are coming in, helping foster that sense of just like, hey, take the off-beaten path, right? Don't just go straight down, a straight job. Like think about what you can do. And like that sort of culture is very apparent in the Bay Area. That's just not there at the university layer, like UT Austin and like similarly in Austin. And I think finally is like, we just need more investors, like just more funding, right? A lot of the funding in Austin goes to like, I would say like SaaS businesses and some of these related businesses, but there's less moonshots kind of happening within Austin. And also there's just less funding in general. And so you see a lot of people who do start up here end up moving to the Bay Area or moving to New York because just the ecosystem here just isn't as like mature. There's not as much funding. There's not as much talent. There's not as much market in general. And so I think there's a combination of things that kind of just take time to like go. I remember listening to Jim Breyer, who like lives in Austin now, talk about like what he thought it took, and he literally doubled down these same points too, which is we need to invest more in the university layer, and we just need to get more funding into the ecosystem. And so I think with that, it just takes time. So I'm hopeful that Austin over the next 5-10 years really skyrockets. I think investment into like UT Austin as like the hotbed for innovation and like fresh talent is going to be really, really important. I think with bringing like the Elon bringing all like the Tesla and like X.com and kind of all these like Neuralink headquarters to Austin will also bring a bunch of talent over. And I think fundamentally, like we just need more technical talent in Austin to like build these technical startups. And I think that will come with time, these companies moving here. And I'm really hopeful that like over time, like if we can figure out that recipe of success, like Austin can become Barrier 2.0. But frankly, I will say like I don't think anything will ever replace the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. It's just one of one. It's one of one in the entire world. And it took like a perfect concoction of like luck and things to go right and everything kind of aligned for what Bay Area became to happen. And I don't think Austin should necessarily like reach to try to become Barrier 2.0, but I think there's elements they can take and learn from that explosion to like make Austin a lot more startup friendly and at least increase the ecosystem of innovation within the Austin area.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about like how talent from Berkeley and Stanford like injects into Silicon Valley. Because I remember I was talking to Laith about this, where like I just recently noticed that the founder of Databricks is like, for example, a professor at UC Berkeley. And he's like still actively a professor at UC Berkeley, right? And it's
Yep.
like, imagine like you go into class and it's like, oh, here's the CEO and founder of like a company that just got the biggest series round in like history, right? It's like that's gonna like inspire you to like go straight into startups and not even want to go to like the general suite route.
Yeah. What's
Yeah.
crazy with Berkeley and Stanford is they have like straight pipelines of like cutting edge research that they've built like this, like they literally built a pipeline of taking this cutting edge research and turning that into a company. So there's this lab specifically at Berkeley that I'm a huge fan of called like the Sky Lab. It's also called like LMSys. Like there's multiple different names. They're kind of like all similar in the same department of Berkeley. But these professors, there's one guy in particular named Anish, but he's responsible for like Anyscale, which is like a huge company that recently raised their Series C. He's responsible for Databricks, responsible for like Apache, like Spark, I'm pretty sure, responsible for like these new things. And like it's all just research that they put out in open source and they learn how to build like companies based off that. And so there's like this huge pipeline of like that's just been built up over time. And that doesn't really happen at UT. Like there's very few professors that are like one so research minded and can like put out something cutting edge, right? And UT has a ton of those kind of professors. But then to take that and then commercialize it is usually a big no-no in like academia. Like you want to stick with academia. You don't want to like introduce like I guess like commercialization because that kind of like taints the research. But like what I noticed is that the culture is like pretty different. Like these professors are like, how do we take this and turn it into like a multi-billion-dollar idea? Like that's their mindset. And so there's a couple of professors at UT that really influenced me during my time that have those characteristics, but I think it's just so much more widespread at like an institution like Berkeley and Stanford, which leads to a lot more like the research to company pipeline, like you said with Databricks. I think that professor's name is like Ali Ghoti. Like he's in that same lab with Ayn Stoica.
He's Persian too, so that's
Oh,
like
that's amazing. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Like I've never like seen that before in my life. Like when I was like looking at his LinkedIn, I was like, dude, this LinkedIn is like it looks fake. Like the LinkedIn meme warriors, like they just like put like random crap on their LinkedIn sometimes. It just like shocked me when I saw
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. It's pretty insane. It only happens in the Bay Area, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even say the one professor I remember that was kind of injecting like the idea of like doing a startup. My senior design class, I was working with Stable Diffusion, which is like this open source image generative model, and this was like at the conception of those models when they were like getting really popular. But I had a professor, Alex Damakis at UT, and he was
Alex
giving me
Damakis.
advice.
I actually pitched him on Agora. He's
Yeah.
one of the professors I pitched. He's awesome, by the way. I think he's at Berkeley now too, by the way.
Yeah,
He's Berkeley
that's the funny
trained
thing.
and he's
Yeah,
going to
that's the
Berkeley. I
funny
think he's
thing.
going back to Berkeley, which is crazy, but yeah, Professor Damakis is insane. He's so smart and he's publishing a lot of research on LLM evaluation, but also just like adding more reasoning to models. So like, yeah, the work that he's doing is going to be fundamentally important for like this industry that we're going in. So I've definitely been paying attention to his work, which is crazy that you got to take a class with him. It's pretty insane.
Yeah. I mean, he was my advisor for senior design, and I just remember like he was always kind of pushing our team, like, guys, this could really become like a startup thing. Like, if you guys like take it the right direction, like this could. It was like nice to have that sort of feedback because I think when you're working on projects and you're kind of in the academic sphere, there's just this kind of idea of like, just publish the paper, publish the project, call it quits. Like you've made your contribution to history, but arguably, especially in ML and AI, like this space isn't really just a space for publishing papers. Like this, the real frontier work is actually being done on the ground in industry, in the startups that are using the technology. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting. Also, it's kind of funny because like he's one of the only professors I had, and then he's gone back to Berkeley to be in the Bay Area, and he's working on like his own startup. So yeah, it's like
Yeah.
really interesting. That
It's
that
pretty
whole thing.
telling. It's pretty telling. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I'm hopeful that UT can continue to get these kind of professors that can help inspire, the talent. Cause I genuinely do think that like we have the talent to go toe for toe with any sort of university. I wasn't really into startups until I had a professor named Professor Sriram Vishwanath, who's an ECE professor, and he was the sponsor for like our club Texas blockchain. And he was like, Anish, I want you to come help me with these startups and do these things. And I was like, wow, this is a whole new world I didn't realize. And he was constantly telling me about like stuff that was only in research papers, but he was like, dude, this is gonna like take off in the next couple of months. Like you should read into it, or like you should explore this idea. And even when I did started working on these startup ideas, he like was like fortunate enough to like, connect me with investors that had talked to him in the past, or like connect me with researchers who are like super useful in the space, whether it's like GANs or like stable diffusion models, whatever it was. He even like let me do customer discovery with his PhDs, and he let me like, get my MVP in front of like a lot of his researchers to like use our GPUs for like fine tuning models or mounting huge buckets of like image data to like train a whole new model from scratch, like all these things. Like without key people like that in your life at the university layer, like it's very, very hard to jump into entrepreneurship very early on. And I was lucky to even cross paths with someone like Professor Vishwanath, but like we need so many more of these kind of Professor Damakis, Professor Vishwanath types to really at least help drive it the same way that at Berkeley and Stanford it gets driven.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what's really cool is now that you're like involved with Brev and like you guys, you do the hackathons and like San Francisco and like all these different places, right? You can probably bring that to Austin eventually too, right? So you can
Yeah.
really start influencing it the way that you like see it going.
Yeah, and that's not to say that in Austin that energy isn't there for sure. There's a couple people like in Austin. There's an investor I know named Jake O'Shea at this VC called Antler VC. He throws like he throws these monthly AI meetups within Austin. He throws these hackathons with like Meta and like Grok and a couple other companies, and he's done a great job like fostering it. But we need more. We need more people like him to constantly do that. And so yeah, I mean, hopefully, I would love to come back to Austin someday. I think I'll definitely be in the Bay Area for the immediate meantime, but I would love to come back to Austin and see that sort of foster growth and see where I can continue to add some fuel to the fire there. But I think there is definitely like a talent exodus that's happening. So Austin needs to find a way to keep the talent within the city and to foster the ecosystem to make sure there's no exodus to either SF or New York.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Now, one thing I want to transition into, and I think Laith is kind of waiting for this too, is let's talk about Brev to Nvidia now. I think that's the good stuff because, I mean, that transition, I would imagine, was probably like, you probably thought you were in a dream, I'm guessing, right? So I'd love to know a little bit more about like that. What was it like going through that process? You probably met some really, really cool people. And yeah, just walk us through that.
Yeah, it was definitely a whirlwind of a time. Natter had gotten married in like mid-June. Summer, we all went down to Santa Barbara, came back, and about a week later, he was like, "Yo, so Nvidia just gave us a final offer. They like want us to sign," and I was like, "Nvidia wants to like buy us?" Like I kind of known about it, obviously, since kind of like late May or June that these talks are kind of going. But the number one thing that Natter would say is like, "Don't get distracted. These sort of things go all the way, all the time. And at the last mile, they literally fall apart." So focus on just like scaling Brev and doing the amazing job you guys are doing right now. So I kind of put the idea of that out of my head for so long because I didn't know whether it was going to happen or not. And like I had seen it firsthand where like, actors just kind of go last minute and just kind of drop. So whenever the news did break though, I was kind of just like, holy cow, like this space is crazy. I went from just like sitting in my dorm or just like sitting in my apartment in West Campus, like a couple months prior, like literally 5 months prior to now, like being acquired by Nvidia. Like that's a kind of a mind blowing thing. But also on top of that, I was like, wow, like now I have this amazing opportunity at like what is like the world's most important company right now to then take this opportunity that I'm building and scale it even more. And the way I describe it is like Nvidia has like courtside seats to almost like any industry or any cutting edge thing happening right now. Whereas the robotics, just pure computing and hardware, to like AI, to like LLMs, like Nvidia's the courtside seat always. And like they may not always be like the main players playing the game, but they're definitely right there. And so whatever like sort of pathway that I'd want to go down for like the next stage of the career or like next startup, whatever it is, like Nvidia is immediately going to set us up for that. And that was like such a gratifying feeling. I think immediately also the talent density at Nvidia is also pretty insane. Like there's so many smart people around, and because the organization is so flat, you can just go up to any senior leader and just like talk to them, and they'll give you the time of day. It's like really talk through like what's going on. It's very often that you'll see in like these high level meetings, you'll also see like an intern or you'll see like a fresh grad like in these same meetings. So it's pretty wild to see like that sort of culture within Nvidia. And like I think as like a first company to work at other than startups, it was a pretty insane feeling. When we got there on the first day, a lot of it was just like straight meetings, just kind of like getting to know like what the org looks like, what our kind of like vision is for like how we'll integrate, et cetera, et cetera. And then around like 4 p.m., like Jensen walked into the room, like the conference room that we're in. And he starts like handing out like these Taiwanese candy to all of us, like walking around the table, and then sits at the front. It was, I remember like just blacking out. Like I don't fully remember exactly what happened. I was kind of just like, holy shit, like I'm sitting next to, like I'm sitting with Jensen. But he's like, do you guys have any questions for me? And like people on my team were just asking him, like, where do you see the space moving forward? What's your vision for Brev, et cetera? And he starts going off into this like futuristic world of like digital workers operating at scale where there's like billions of them, and like they're all going to be powered by like AI agents, and how like the world's going to have like this explosion of productivity and all these things. And I remember just being, wow, this guy like sits like 10 years in the future, literally, and then draws that back to what do I need to do today? Like that was like one of the most insane feelings. So then after that, that's when we started getting assimilated into NVIDIA, starting to understand how the underpinnings work. And, as I think about it, like NVIDIA is actually the place where I've worked the longest so far. So now that I've spent this time at NVIDIA, I feel like I kind of understand how like the machine works and how you can take it to go learn and go down any rabbit hole that you'd want to, but also how to like kind of support all the different initiatives going on. So that's a pretty high level of like how the initial phase of NVIDIA kind of turned out. But yeah, dude, it's been one of the most insane learning opportunities of my life. Like I told you, like I didn't come from like a traditional background to like make me end up at NVIDIA, but I've just learned so much by just picking all the smart people brains around me. And then also like at NVIDIA, you have the ability to kind of just take ownership and like make shit happen. And so I've been given the opportunity to like kind of like lead different initiatives, take on different things that I see. Like if I see an opportunity, like NVIDIA is one of the very few places where like as somebody who's kind of like less experienced can just go and just make shit happen. And I think like the culture really makes that happen. I'm really excited to keep, using that to my advantage to keep taking on stuff that I'm learning a ton in and also feel a little bit uncomfortable in, because that's what gets me out of my comfort zone to like grow and hopefully set me up for hopefully a future startup down the line.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, I guess the switch from Agora to Brev, in some sense, like there was the common theme of both of you guys being startups that are on the upwards trajectory. Maybe they were ahead of you guys, but it was still like two startups fundamentally like working on a problem. Then Nvidia is just a completely different ballgame. So for you guys, kind of obviously when you were getting acquired by Brev, there was all the tension you guys had and all the arguments you guys had discussing like what's the pros, the cons of like doing this. With Nvidia specifically, was there not a worry about losing that kind of startup culture that you guys had? Because obviously it's a big company,
Of
massive
course.
company with all sorts of bureaucracy at all levels. So what were the pros, cons that you guys were kind of weighing with the deal? And then like what was the final thing that really just made you guys say like, yeah, we're gonna do this?
Yeah, 100%. That's a great question, actually. Because as many of the pros as there were, some of the big cons of joining a big company is like they might immediately stifle your innovation. Actually, it's very common to join a big company after an acquisition and for them to just tear apart your product and just split up the team, right? And it felt like we had captured lightning in a bottle with Brev. We just had this amazing team, super cracked. We're just constantly just on our feet, toes, just shipping in all directions. And like it's like if you join Nvidia, there's a good chance that can be split up and just like ripped apart. There's also a good chance that we kind of go in and like realize like, wow, these guys don't really know what they acquired. They're kind of just like not using us in the right way, and we just did all this for nothing. Like, we had this grand vision which we sacrificed so much for, and we joined Nvidia, and they're immediately just like they don't see the same vision as us, and they direct us into like some other pathway. So those are like some of the immediate cons as well. Also in like venture investing, some of the investors have like specific say in like the deal. So even if like we thought it was a good idea, like the investors themselves also have to like, see from their perspective like whether it was like the best financial outcome for them, whether like they wanted us to go this way, like they all have like controlling power to an extent too, right? It was a combination of just balancing out like, can we still continue on the pathway that we'd go on? If not, what does Nvidia see for us? Can we be very clear about that? And three, like literally, what are like the implications of the deal? Like, does it make sense for like a financial standpoint? is it worth it to just keep grinding the startup? Like these are all like massive things, and like Nvidia, like you would think, like just being like the most cash flow intense, like I guess cash flow free business right now, like you would think they would just be willing to acquire, but they're actually very stingy. They drew out the negotiation process. They're playing hardball, like as they should, right? And I think that was really interesting to see as well. Like they weren't willing to just like acquire just cause, like they were really doing deep diligence. They're talking to like all of our competitors, really just understand the market, like really, really going ham in the negotiation process. But to really answer your question directly, I think like we had to balance out whether like we're giving up on our dream that we had started doing, like our vision, and if joining Nvidia was going to like harm that, or if joining Nvidia could advance that further. I think ultimately the thing that kind of sold us was like the VP and like the person who pushed the deal on the Nvidia side. He was like, look, like you guys can like immediately come in and do what you guys are doing, but your pedigree and like what you're working on, like scale of the problem you're working on will immediately like 100-fold or even 1,000-fold. And you guys need to take this opportunity to actually reach even more people and use us as a vehicle to do that. And in doing that, you guys can also make a massive culture change within NVIDIA as well. You guys can teach NVIDIAns how to, they call it NVIDIAns, like internal NVIDIA employees, but NVIDIAns, you can teach NVIDIAns how to, work with developers, think about these things, think about building a product that like people love and are excited by. Like, just as much as you guys can learn, you can also help teach a lot of the company with some of your like understanding and your own thesis of the way to operate. And so I think it's a combination of just understanding that like, okay, this is a massive opportunity to up-level ourselves and like upscale the amount of impact that we can have. But also on top of that, like have some sort of impact on the company's future moving forward and on the people that work inside of it. And now that I've kind of looked back, now I'm like 7 months in, I would say like that's definitely been the case. Like we've been able to like expand the impact that we've had on people, work with like some of the biggest companies in the world. But also on top of that, like I think the culture change that we've had from NVIDIA has been really, really apparent. And I'd say overall, I would say like we're all pretty pleased with how the acquisition went down.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that's really cool. So, like, kind of digging into that. So, you said, like, once you all entered, right, they said that the scope of the problem significantly increased, right? Like, could you dig a little bit into that? Like, what does the future look like 5, 10 years from now for a product like Brev, right? Like, what does Nvidia see, I guess, and what do you like y'all see in terms of the direction of actual?
Yeah, it's interesting because we are still figuring that out too, you know. So it's like it's actually a very timely question. I would say like when we joined, like our main mission was like, can we put GPUs in the hands of developers as easily as possible, and can we make them make sure that they can like build AI and ML and like these sort of GPU accelerated computing applications on top of our GPUs. So that core mission never changed. Kind of how we went about it though was we would have to be scrappy. We'd have to go to hackathons. We'd have to make YouTube videos and content, and that doesn't change, right? Like we're still continuing to do that. But I think immediately like there's developers not just at the lower level, but also massive companies and enterprises like Salesforce and stuff who like still also need a very easy way to access GPUs in the cloud and to be able to build their application on top of it. And so Brev immediately, yes, like we focus on like smaller players, smaller startups, etc. At the Nvidia scale though, we're still servicing them. But now there's like immediate enterprise customers who are like, wow, like I can still use this service right now. And if it's an Nvidia service, like I definitely will be using it. So you kind of have to immediately deal with like enterprise customers who are not going to deal with like broken bugs and like issues with the product. Like they're definitely a lot less, flexible with that. But also at the same time, like this sort of like opportunity to work with some like companies and like see what they're working on, see how they're using Brev to like push that forward has been like really, really insane. Moving forward, kind of like the direction for Brev is to like really increase NVIDIA's muscle for working with developers the same way we were as a startup, but also find a way to build like an enterprise grade product that can surface the developers, but also surface some of these developers at the top company. Because everywhere you look, everyone's a developer, right? And at NVIDIA, we call it like community developers or like enterprise developers. They still want like the best damn developer experience possible. And our charter when we joined NVIDIA was like, can you build the best damn developer experience on top of GPUs? And that's at a high level what we're going to continue doing. And so that's been really interesting for me. Now, obviously the space is moving really fast. So like there's so much talk around like agentic workflows and building agentic systems, like autonomous systems. And obviously NVIDIA is at the forefront of like robotics and kind of all these other verticals. So it's interesting to see how like you can use like the GPU just sort of like in the cloud to apply to many different areas, not just like LLMs or not just like stable diffusion models and stuff. So I think there's going to be interesting growth verticals and like pathways to go about. But I think at the base, the core mission is still going to just be, can you build like the best possible experience while using a GPU anywhere else in the world? And I think if we just continue on that mission, we have a pretty bright future ahead of us.
Yeah, I'm really curious because obviously you've kind of like worked you've kind of gone up the stack now, right? You worked at Agora, you worked at Brev, now you've worked at Nvidia. So you've kind of seen the scale and like the question of like, what is the role that compute is playing in today's, startups and obviously all the technology that we're developing. I guess projecting to the future, what is your prediction or like what are your general thoughts about what compute looks like? Do you think DeepSeek just happened? The DeepSeek R1 model just got released. Oh, obviously, we've seen a lot of like stock market fluctuations. Everyone's panicking, and everyone's giving their opinion basically. So, and it seems like a lot of the issue is rooted in compute because a lot of people are looking at this model, and it was trained with like what, like $6 million, like 90% less or 90% more cost efficient than OpenAI. What do you think compute's going to look like? Are we heading in a direction where personal compute, decentralized compute, that is going to be the wave, or is it going to continuously be the cloud providers kind of, providing all the compute for everyone, centralized computing still kind of wins out?
Yeah, I think it'll be a combination of both. I don't think it's binary. And the DeepSeek example is like actually really telling because I think it's actually net positive for the ecosystem. And that's how like pretty much every person at Nvidia I've talked to kind of sees it, right? Like this new innovation, it's called test time compute. And it means like at the compute layer, you're actually able to like think and like process and like reflect. And so DeepSeek is really, really good like inference time compute. And so at the inference level, whenever you're hosting the model and it gets like an input, it's actually able to like stop and kind of think and like reason through like an answer and then like spit out like the actual output. And that's like a huge revelation because it actually increases like accuracy of the model's outputs, even though it may take time. And so as it's kind of like thinking through, like if you think about like how it works, it thinks through like 4 different pathways, for example, on how to answer a problem. It explores each one and it explores like the outcome. And it's like, okay, actually this pathway will have the most accurate outcome. I'll just go take that. So if you think about that, that's really computationally expensive to run and host. And also it's just like a search problem. So it's just like takes time. And so both of these things are like new frontiers to go and like optimize, right? Like got to make these models cheaper to even run and stuff like that. But I think what's insane is like this just happened and like this is like a brand new paradigm. And this is like DeepSeek is still a relatively like small model as like what it could be. So I think you're going to see like more and more companies and labs using these same techniques to build their own models, first of all, which will lead to an explosion of compute. And I think secondly of all, like people want to run these models locally. And what's insane is like DeepSeek released like the big 671 billion parameter model, which is massive, but they also distilled it down to like smaller, more consumable models. So you have like even DeepSeek 1.5 billion, which you can run on an iPhone. You can run on a phone. And so I think you're going to see a combination of like to train, you're obviously going to need these massive data centers and, cloud grade sort of like compute environments to like actually train them. But to host these models, like theoretically, you can run these models on, like edge devices, on robots, on iPhones, on phones, on like smartwatches, etc. And like that's where like I think like the space will kind of evolve into, which is like if you got these people training models, it might happen a lot in the cloud or on like these massive data centers on prem. And as you kind of move into like hosting the model itself, like you'll probably see more models get hosted on like iPhones or like on like laptops themselves or more locally, more distributed, as you kind of described it. So they can kind of be like more local, more personalized, but also more advantageous to the end user. So I think we'll see a combination of the two. In 10 years, I think like obviously working at Nvidia, I have to predict like an explosion in compute, but also like it just makes sense, right? Like more and more compute and data is going to be thrown. Like the scaling laws aren't dead. So more data, more compute, and more optimization around these techniques will continue pushing progress of AI forward. We're definitely not stagnant. We're still so early. And I think the common denominator is like you're just going to need more data and more compute, and more smart people to constantly push this forward. And I think Nvidia is really well positioned to like push that paradigm moving forward. Where that compute lives will be a combination of cloud, on-prem, local devices, edge AI even as well. Especially as robotics kind of comes to the picture as well, you're going to need like these intelligent systems that can have these models deployed on them, but out in the world. And you're not going to be able to strap like a huge H100 GPU that's like a data center server rack. You can't like strap that on a robot. Like it has to be small, optimized, be able to run on the edge without Wi-Fi. And so I think you're start to see like the training again happen like these large scale clusters and more like the actual inferencing and usage of these models out in the field on like these smaller devices that can run them locally.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit because you mentioned, I mean, I guess for your background, right? From what I understand, it seems like you kind of did a lot of things. Even like a funny thing is that you've done Jeopardy twice. So like you're interested, like they're just everywhere, man. You're kind of doing everything.
Yeah.
I guess talk to me about that. Like, what kind of got you into startups initially? Where was your brain at, like, kind of going through school, going through college, the Jeopardy thing? Like, how does it all like fit together and lead you to now working at Nvidia?
Yeah. I think like at the time, like doing all these things felt so random. And even now looking back, they're a bit random, but you can connect the dots a little bit easier. I think there's one like big thing that I realized growing up, which is I just love to learn. Like whenever I get curious about something, I'll just read a book. I'll read it all in like one night. I'll stay up all night, or I'll just like, go on this path to learn as much as I can. Like I was just naturally curious. And like I made sure to like never lose that no matter what. And there would be periods throughout school or like college where I was like, man, like I hate this class, this is annoying. But I'd spend my time learning about something else, even if it didn't feel like I was doing work. So I was kind of going through college, especially primarily. I was a pre-med student. I was pretty dead set on that pathway for a while. But as kind of going to the classes, I was like, dude, this is not interesting me. And I was actually spending my time learning about like Bitcoin, learning about like cryptography, learning about like how like ML trading worked like on the side. Like, and I didn't know anything, right? I'm brand new to the space. I would read into like investing to companies, venture capital, stuff like that. Just like whatever I could like get my hands on to like learn about. And what was interesting is like if I had like a bit more of the traditional background, I would have had a better chance of getting internships and a better chance of getting jobs. But I knew that like as somebody who was a pre-med student with like very few internships and very few experience, like there's no way I was gonna get jobs at these companies. But I was like, dude, I know I'm like kind of smart enough to like potentially learn about these things. Like I need to find a way. And around that time was when I first started reading like Paul Graham essays. But luckily enough, I was lucky to have a friends. Their names were like Armel and Vedant, who were working on the startup called Eclipse AI at the time. And it was very interesting to me to see like how their mindset evolved into like, wow, like we need to build and do startups and like take on this ownership of like chasing after idea we so truly believe in. And working a lot in the blockchain space, like there's so many startups that are also building stuff. And then also I was influenced by a professor named Professor Vishwanath, who I mentioned earlier in the call. The combination of things made me realize like, wow, like I don't think I'll be able to get a job, right? Like straight up, like none of these internship applications are working. Two is like, I feel like if I passionate enough about an idea and I learn about it, like who knows? Like I was so naive. I was like, maybe I could just start a company, right? In retrospect, it was one of the hardest things I ever did, if not the hardest, but like I was so naive in college. So I just did that. And also I was like, if I fail, dude, like I'll fail upwards. And that was the most important thing is like, how can I always fail upwards when I try something out? Like, I don't want to just settle and like stay like complacent with like how I am. Like, there's always a new frontier to be hit. And so I was like, if I try a startup, like, sure, I might fail. Maybe I'll have to live at my parents' house for some time and get back on my feet. Maybe I'll have to like grind leak code and like figure out how to become an engineer, or maybe I'll have to like become like a product manager at like some startup somewhere or some small company. But that's like the worst that could happen, right? I'm still a college student. I have all this time on my hands. Like the best that could happen is it could take me to a whole new frontier. Maybe like we grow the company to $1 billion, or maybe I sell my company to Nvidia, right? Like that was the best case option. And so I think like going on that pathway was like so exhilarating because like any small like maybe we met somebody like important, or maybe like we had a huge customer discovery call, or maybe we like find it was able to build something. Every small moment was like so powerful for building along the way that it kept us going. It was like infectious. It was like almost intoxicating to like, keep grinding down and like see the efforts of your own labor finally bear fruit. And so combination of all those things, and I think also entrepreneurship at its core, you're constantly forced to learn about the customer, learn about the market, learn about your competitors, learn how the world is moving, and constantly adjusting your hypotheses on it. And you talk about Jeopardy and you talk about all these things. Like I just love to learn. I was voracious, and so as an entrepreneur, you're constantly learning, and like that ultimately was what I was like down to do. I was always curious. I was always down to learn, and I realized entrepreneurship is one of the best ways to put yourself in that position where you're constantly on your feet, constantly learning, and you can't ever settle. Like you have to keep learning about new things, and you have to like be like super good at your domain, and also understand how the rest of the world is shaping up, so you can find the best opportunity to build a business. So at the time, dude, I had no idea what I was doing. Frankly, I was just doing stuff. That's like the best way to put it. In retrospect, what I realized I had done was like I had put myself in positions where I could fail upwards. And that really helped me get to the position where I am today. And like it was definitely risky, but I realized that the risk as a college student is much less than it was a risk if I was like 30 or like 40 with like kids and a family. And so that big realization also just pushed me to be like, all right, let me try to fail upwards as much as I can. The final thing I'll say is like I watched Steve Jobs video where he was like, everything around you in the world was shaped by somebody who like didn't see that the way before, right? So they just saw the world in some state, they molded it into a way that they thought was like ideal, and they left the world as they saw it. And so the world has gone through these different sort of like people molding it and like shaping it into the way they want it to be seen and left their mark on like the world. And that really hit me where I was like, there's definitely a way I can like mold and make my impact. And like, if you think of the world like clay, like I should definitely be able to leave my imprints on it and then be that as my legacy. And so I was like, what better way to do that than as an entrepreneur, right? Like that was kind of the, I was reading all the Steve Jobs hype videos and stuff. And I was like, okay, like generally through this pathway, you could find a way to make an impact on the world, leave it better than you found it, and then also find a way to fill upwards. And for me, it was like, okay, I might have to sacrifice spending time with my friends or playing IM soccer as much with Laith or like going to Greg to like get some hoop runs in. But it also meant that I was getting this insane opportunity to meet like some of the smartest people in the space, like make a name for myself and hopefully make a shit ton of money.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think I guess to play a bit of devil's advocate on the startup space in general, I think especially with SF, one thing that I think is kind of tricky. Omeed shared something that was really interesting. Jan LeCun, who's like, one of the biggest voices in the ML space, one of the godfathers of AI. He was talking about kind of like SF culture. And part of it is like founder culture as well, but there's this kind of element of like being in a bubble. And in this bubble, there's like this massive echo chamber of self-validation. This idea is definitely going to work. We have this monopoly on great ideas. So obviously you've been in different spaces now. You've been in 3 different companies in rapid succession. How do you navigate kind of the balance of knowing that you are working on like the right idea and that your idea is good, and then not being kind of so delusional and kind of in your own head about it to where you're not really seeing like the true vision of like where your product fits, where your vision is
Yeah.
grounded.
It's a tough balance, dude. Seriously. Like I said, any sort of business opportunity or market opportunity comes down from the idea that you have a unique insight or perspective on the world that other people don't. And you take advantage of the opportunity of building a product where there hasn't been anything before, building a solution, and then just exposing it to the market. And I think it's really hard because in SF, yes, they say a lot of founders are in a bubble and they're like so delusional with ideas. But I think that's kind of a product environment, right? Like, in order to see this idea through, like you really, really have to believe in what it could be. And at that point, like that is classified as delusion. Like you believe that like your idea is like absolutely necessary, otherwise the world's gonna die without it. But like that's the kind of conviction you need to like dedicate your life and like sacrifice some of these important things that you could be doing in life otherwise to like make that happen. And so I think that like, yes, I'm not saying SF is perfect. I think there's definitely a lot of issues like the bubble, the culture here or whatnot. The one thing that does strike me still to this day is like, in order to succeed at startups, you have to be like almost delusional. You have to truly believe. And like I said, like early on in the Agora days, so many people were criticizing the product. They're like, dude, why would anyone ever use this? Like everything's going to go to the big cloud players, or like people are going to have their own personal GPU. There's no need for anything like this. Like the market's so small. It's not an attractive segment. Like I was hearing all these things constantly. People were like, why aren't you going to get a job? What are you doing? Like you're screwing yourself up. Like you're constantly hearing these things, right? And if you don't have a strong sense of will internally to be like, I will shape the world and make sure this happens, then yeah, like all these things are going to distract you. They're going to pull you off the pathway. And like it happens to a lot of founders. And so I think like the final thing I'll say is just like, you'll never find the exact balance. But if you are going to go on this pathway, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of sweat, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, tears, like all these hustle people like to call it. But like in order to do that, you have to have true conviction. And some people will see it as delusion. Other people will just see it as like inspiration. And so it's kind of like how you shape it. And like ultimately you can't be too caught up in a bubble. You can't, be in the same kind of circle and constantly hearing the same thing. You have to expose yourself to new ideas. But I think that's sort of like delusion and conviction is actually what make founders go out and try to attempt something as crazy as doing a startup. And looking back, like, dude, if I had like known all these things, like I actually don't know if I would have done a startup in college because it was really hard. It was really stressful, and I did sacrifice a lot, frankly. And I was pretty delusional with like, oh, I thought Agora could become a $1 billion company. But I think at the same time, like that's what led me to even go on this pathway and to even try and like end up here. And I would say it's kind of like a mix of two things. You kind of have to balance it out and make sure you're net benefiting the society as always. I think that delusion is what makes a startup founder great. And so you have to like carefully balance the delusion with like traditional practicalism.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think it's interesting. So kind of delusion is like a necessary precondition for better or for worse for like making the startups kind of work out.
It's how you frame it. Some people will call it delusion. Some people will just call it like, wow, he sees the world in a whole different way. Like that's insane. It's however you want to classify it.
Once you get acquired, delusion turns to genius, right? That's like what happened.
Yeah.
Looking back, everyone's like, "Oh, I knew it was gonna happen. Like, I knew you could do this. I knew Nvidia was gonna acquire you guys." And I'm like, dude, at the time, I didn't know what I was doing, right? Like, I thought I was like crazy for like even for like going after this idea. Like, I was going to like Professor Demakis, and like he like left me on red because like frankly, my startup didn't have much value to him. He had all the A100s in the world at the time, like through like the supercomputing clusters. So like all that said, like if I didn't have like some level of just like wow, like I see this that no one else does, then none of this would ever happen. Like I didn't have if I didn't have that unique insight into what I thought could happen, the startup never would have happened. And if I did have that, and if a lot of people kind of agreed there, then that means the opportunity kind of passed. That means other people are like ahead of you, already working on it, have already made their mark. So it's kind of like the boat is kind of sailed.
It's really awesome, like how technically coherent you are, despite the fact that you didn't like go down that path, right? It kind of shows like anyone can really do it as long as you have the conviction to continue and try to build
Yeah,
it.
100%. I take a lot of inspiration from my best friend Ishan. He was like my co-founder at Agora. He also came from like a very like non-traditional background. He was econ at A&M, and towards the end of it, like really got into like statistics and like linear algebra, which is like obviously the basis for machine learning. And I would just see him dive straight in, dude. Like he would just pick up a repository and like learn like scikit-learn or learn like PyTorch or like learn these things on his own. He like hustled his way into like getting a master's at Columbia. So he started doing his master's in CS program before he dropped out to join Brev. But like I saw him scrap his way and like, dude, he would just like download a repository and just like dive through it. Like see something cool on GitHub, pull it onto his computer, dive through all the code, ask GPT questions, and like pick up his understanding. He would take notes on his iPad of like what was valid, what was not. And that was so insanely powerful to me because I was like, you can just do things. Like just because you're non-technical doesn't mean you can't become technical. Like just because you're technical doesn't mean you can't go like become a good business person and go sell and learn how to do these things. Like you can just do things. I think your identity is actually constantly like shaping and should be like water. And you should never like, especially early on in your life, be like, I am this, I am that, I am technical, I am these things, I am that thing. Like that's the worst thing to put yourself in. You set these like imaginary barriers around yourself. Whereas like, dude, the world is just the world. Like you can do whatever you want. Like I just like quit my job tomorrow and just like go like make coffee and like become like a barista and like I'll become like the best damn barista, right? But like the point is like the world is actually like much more malleable and flexible than you think it is, and I think that like Sean helped me understand that like one could like learn a lot technically, but also like some of the things you have to do is just ask questions, rely on the people around you. Like, don't be afraid to be the dumb person in the room because once you kind of like embrace that, you actually just end up like learning so much more and you have like this exponential rate of growth that you only realize like once you look back. And so if you told myself like 1 year ago that I'd know this much, that I'm building these agentic applications or, working in robotics and shit, I'd be like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way I could ever do that. I can't even code. Like, I couldn't code back then. But now I'm like trying to build applications, trying to like do all these pretty complex things. And I think that like if I had had the mindset of like I'm not technical, I can't do this, I would have shot myself in the foot. But rather, I think the thing that kind of helped me was I was like I got from pre med to like working on all these different things where I was like, dude, there's actually no barrier to like doing things. You can just do it. It might take you a little bit longer. It might be more frustrating, but like you can just do things. And so that was a huge freeing moment for me. And I would say that's definitely what got me to this point. And I think a lot of people have this preconceived notion of like, dude, like I kind of took this major, I'm kind of stuck in this pathway, or like I'm kind of stuck on this, like I took this job, like I'm kind of stuck here. Like I think people like take the world to be too rigid than it is. Like you can actually figure it out, but it does take a lot of courage, takes a lot of conviction, and it is hard.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, Anish, how many hours have you put behind the terminal, like in this entire process? I mean, I'm imagining you've had to like pick up a bunch of things, SSH,
Uh,
Python scripts,
yeah,
Jupyter notebooks, everything.
I don't know if I could put a number on the hours. It's definitely a lot, but I would say like I enjoyed not the debugging parts, but I enjoy like learning about it and like getting in front of a computer and be able to do that. It felt like magic to me. Both my parents work in like the IT space. My mom works in like cybersecurity. My dad works in like big data and just like machine learning and stuff. I was like kind of familiar with it, but I always felt like computer was like this wizardry thing and like coding was like I don't know, it was just insane. And then I realized it was actually pretty accessible. With the advent of like, Claude and GPT, like, dude, you can just like build so much stuff. And like, if you ever don't know how to do something, you can go in Cursor and just be like, hey, how do I like, I don't know, do XYZ things. And like, it'll literally spit out the code for you. And so you can't obviously fully rely on it, but it's like, it's good enough to get you like 90% of the way there. And after that, it's just like learning how to piece these things together, how they work in workflows, how like, what's the traditional paradigms for doing it. And now there's never been a better time to learn how to become technical than it is now. Like there's just infinite resources to learn. If you need to learn something about a concept, you can just go on like Perplexity or go on like GPT or go on like Claude. Just go, explain this to me like I'm 5, and then work your way up to like a really solid understanding. And so, yeah, I would say many hours behind terminal, many hours in Jupyter notebooks, many hours in like Cursor, but it's like I don't see myself becoming less technical anymore. Like I have to become technical. Like that's like at least that's the path that I would like to go down. And I think there's infinite resources to do that these days.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
I mean, dude, that's awesome. I think definitely like from what I've gathered, at least from like seeing people in the startup space, it seems like getting rid of the rigidity of like or just like kind of flipping the framework from which you view the world. It's definitely understanding the idea that kind of there are things that are malleable and then you just kind of have to go for it. Being willing to get your hands dirty, that sort of thing, it's all important. You're at Nvidia now. It's kind of like you're a product manager or like kind of whatever, right? So what are you kind of doing to kind of retain that same sort of energy that you had when you were during the startup? Like, I guess like also to branch out on that question, like looking ahead to the future, like what do you see for yourself in terms of the directions you want to go and like what are you doing to get there basically?
Yeah. So I'll work backwards a little bit. I think like there's this concept like AGI, right? I'm sure you've heard of it. Like I don't really know exactly what AGI means or ASI means, but I think it's like
Yeah, I don't
the
think anyone really does. I don't think anyone really
yeah,
does.
exactly. But it's like this frontier where like you have like these sort of like AI intelligent systems that don't really need human intervention anymore. And like, look, I'm not gonna say like AI is gonna take over the world. Like, I don't want that. We gotta set up guardrails and make sure it's like safe and like controlled and all these things. But like, I think the point that you get to where like AI is fully autonomous without human intervention is when you have these like reasoning systems and intelligent systems that can think for themselves. So they're called like agentic systems that can operate at scale. I think it's when you have like the ability to then attach that to like fine motor skills and have like some sort of physical form, which is like probably gonna be via robotics. And I think it's when you give them like a wallet and the ability to like communicate and like pay each other and interact with each other in an economy. And I think that'll come from the blockchain. And so those are like the three main areas I'm like really thinking about, like especially right now, is agentic systems. How do you induce reasoning into these models and how do you get them acting autonomously and working at scale while setting up guardrails, right? So they don't just go out and do crazy stuff. Like you can align them to what you want. How do you make them steerable? How do you like attach that to some sort of physical form so they take physical actions in like on like Earth and like this physical world that we live in? And then how do you give them some way to like pay each other, communicate with each other? And I think that'll really come from like the blockchain, which is much more like it's powered by like smart contracts and code and like all these things. And I think like AI can actually use that significantly better than like humans can. And I think like we haven't even seen what like traditional financial rails can only handle about like 50,000 to like 100,000 transactions per second. But like if you have 80 billion AI agents operating at scale, like that's going to overload our current financial system and our current financial rails. So like there's still going to be like a scalable financial system and like identity system that can like scale with that. And I think blockchain will really power all of that. So I'm like broadly thinking about all of these things from just a high level because that's just like what my like thesis is right now. And Nvidia has like maybe not in the blockchain like payment side, but at least in robotics and agentic reasoning has a huge amount of like projects and teams and stuff working internally. And it's really fascinating to see how like Jensen, like our CEO, thinks because he thinks so far out in the future and like works backwards. And all the different initiatives he has going on in the company are meant towards to like drive towards that future. And so I kind of similarly see myself in that same vein, which is like if I see the future or at least imagine it being this way, how can I work backwards and work on the things that are most directly tangential to that? And so Brev, yes, is extremely, extremely valuable as like an underpinning to all of that. But I'm starting to see this natural evolution to like, hey, like agentic systems are like really taking off right now. And there's a ton of work to be done there. And I actually have been spending a lot of time learning and being curious about it and like understanding how we can actually build them at scale. So how can I like invest some time in like learning about that and even contributing to that at Nvidia, for example. And then from there too, it's like, you're gonna have all these agentic systems, but they need to have like some sort of physical sort of representation. So actually, I invested in Vedant and RML startup as an angel investor. But what they do is make it very easy to deploy like these, models or sort of like over the air updates or even like agents in the future to like these robots that are operating at the edge autonomously, right? And so that's kind of like part of my thesis, which is like robotics can play a huge role in our world moving forward. And it's still pretty early. I don't think robotics have had their ChatGPT moment, but when it does, it's going to be something like we've never seen before. And Nvidia is at the forefront of that. Like there's a huge robotics division within Nvidia that's constantly pushing that. And I think that like being this company, I have the ability to work there. And I'm already kind of working on some stuff in that space, in the robotic space. And then broadly, like my day-to-day job doesn't involve like working in blockchain or like increasing these financial rails, but I'm constantly monitoring that space because my thesis for what that space could become is still really, really powerful. And I think with blockchain, there's still a lot of scams, a lot of crypto pump and dumps or whatever you want to call it, meme coins. But like, there's still so much potential with like the financial rails that power all of that to operate at scale whenever we do have like these intelligent autonomous systems, like almost 80 billion of them, or like whatever number you want to put, like 10, 15 years down the line. So I would say like working at Nvidia has taught me to like think even more in the future and understand what is possible if like capital and like society and like all these things were just like different variables, and how you can like kind of like imagine what the world looks like, and then you can kind of work backwards and see it. Okay, what am I doing today to drive towards that vision? And that's what I've recently just been waking up every day trying to understand is like, what am I doing to like advance that personal vision and belief that I have? Other applications I'm excited about, like I was obviously a pre-med student, right? Using AI to like cure cancer or like cure these diseases is also really, really valuable for me as well. NVIDIA has a huge division there that I've been able to like help and work out with and like ask people a ton of questions. So that's also a really interesting pathway as well. But I think once you kind of get to like these intelligent systems, like my like maybe this is like not paranoid. I guess this is maybe like kind of crazy, but maybe AI will solve like climate change, right? Maybe it'll figure out a way to like capture like carbon and break that up and turn it into oxygen with like like using generative produced like enzyme and stuff. Or maybe like you'll figure out a way to like I don't know like solve like world hunger by like creating food. I don't know. Like these are all crazy ideas, but like, you don't know what is possible. And I think that like getting to that state where like you have intelligent systems running at scale is like really, really exciting at the moment for me. And I think NVIDIA is just well positioned to put me in different places to like advance that vision moving forward. And so, yeah, dude, I'm like, my mindset does not change. I'm constantly going to learn. The world is evolving even more than we're going to see it. We're going to see rapid socioeconomic like sort of shifts, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out. I really hope it plays out, positively and responsibly. And I think it's like really important that we make sure to steer it in the right direction. And in order to do that, I want to play a very important role as we kind of have this big revolution in like society. And I think looking back, we're going to think of this next decade as like a very crazy time in what humanity was. And it's such a huge shift in like how our world works. And I'm excited to even play even a small bit of that in that journey.
I think it's also really cool because Brev, like the acquisition of Brev, positions y'all exactly to help in that space, right? It's like you talk about, okay, how do we solve like cancer, right? Well, okay, if you built an enterprise tool where you can provide compute to like a cancer research center, and then NVIDIA provides the tools to build agents to, for example, do research in that area, Brev is like the foundation for that, right? So I think the enterprise tool route is really interesting because the moment you have institutions across the world start to trust, like, for example, NVIDIA products at an enterprise scale, for example, with something like Brev, now what you just said becomes possible across cancer, world hunger, who knows, like all the different institutions that are working on different problems every day, right?
Yeah,
it can
100%.
span into fintech, it can span into anything, right? So yeah, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And like hopefully helping to power all of that is like my dream moving forward. And obviously I think I'll do a company in the future for sure. And I would love to dive into like one of these areas where I have like huge conviction, even delusion in like we talked about. If I have enough delusion in a certain area to where I can just dive in and dedicate my life towards like, fixing that or like solving that problem, then I think that'll definitely come from the experimentation and the time that I have to learn at NVIDIA. And so super excited to just keep learning, keep doing what I'm doing, keep talking to people like you and like keep getting new perspectives so I can like constantly reshape how I think with the world and maybe how I can leave an impact on it moving forward.
Yeah, I think kind of to close out, I just from your like personal perspective, the whole theme of like the podcast that Omeed and I are kind of trying to do is we're trying to ask the question of like, what does it take to make like a company or a project or whatever from scratch? So I guess to close out, if you had to build, let's say a company or let's say like Brev or Agora Labs from scratch again, what would kind of be your thought process? And for anyone who's like a founder who wants to like start a company, like what are the initial steps to building a company like that, especially with all the lessons that you've now learned compared to what you did?
Yeah. I think the first thing is you have to find the problem. Like what problem are you solving? Like you really attach yourself and that could change over time of a company, but like you have to fundamentally solve a problem, right? And you have to make money off of that. So there's a couple of things you have to answer yourself. Is there a problem that I'm passionate about to dedicate the next 10, 20 years of my life about because I really care about it that much, right? Like that's what a startup would take. And if there, for that problem, is there a massive like market opportunity for like solving that problem, right? Does it make sense? Now, once you do those two things, it's like, okay, do you have friends or people around you that you could like work with to achieve that? Like, do they have the same level of excitement as you with that? And that's not necessarily a prerequisite, but it makes the journey a lot easier. Having Ishan and Tom by my side, there's so many low moments, there's so many high moments. And I couldn't imagine like even doing the startup stuff without them. And I would love to have them and hope to have them like moving forward. But if I wasn't as excited about the problem and like the market opportunity as they were, or if I didn't have the support, I don't know if Agora would have happened either because it's really hard to do by yourself. So you need help. So the next thing to do is like once you identify the problem in the market is to go find potential co-founders. Once you kind of done that, the next thing to do is like start hacking and start building and start talking to people who have that problem. You have to do both those things simultaneously. It's not one or the other. So once you've kind of identified like, okay, I have the different like co-founders figured out, I have the problem figured out. Now it's all about like validating, okay, is that problem real? And can I make money off of it? Is there an opportunity? You have to go and attack this stuff vicariously. Like you have to go talk to as many people as possible in that area. You need to increase your understanding of it and be like, I'm going to target this kind of specific person with this product. And in order to do that, it takes so much time, like talking to people, getting a bunch of no's before you get your first yes, and also understanding like, why aren't other people doing this? Like, am I just crazy for seeing it this way? Or is there actually a real opportunity here? And so throughout that whole process, there will be constant self-doubt. They're constantly be like, oh my God, like I've talked to 100 people and they've all said no. Like I remember I went to San Francisco actually early on in the Agora days. And I was like talking to this dude who was like a massive stability. He worked at Stability AI and he trained on these massive clusters. And I pitched what Agora with him and he laughed. He's like, oh, you think a hotel with like a GPU in the basement is going to like, I can use that to train AI models? Like, what are you talking about, bro? And I was like, okay, so I know this problem is valuable, but it's not valuable to people like him. So I need to stop talking to people like him because he's not going to be my main customer. So if I didn't put myself in those positions with my co-founders to go out and talk to people who had that problem, I would have never learned. At the same time, though, like it's all about building and velocity and shipping. So as soon as you have any insight, how fast can you turn that into something productizable and monetizable, right? Like the world is constantly changing. So it's like you have to constantly be on your toes. Every new learning you have should constantly reshape how you're seeing the problem, how you're seeing the world. And then from there, it's just rapid execution, right? That's where stuff gets tiring. You're about a month or two into this, maybe even like 6 months, and you start to see some sliver like, okay, I can target this person. Well, now you have to have the discipline to just execute. And for months on end, you may not even see anything happen, right? But you have to learn to just keep going, keep going, keep going, waking up every day, taking care of your mental health, taking care of your physical health, taking care of your relationships, and at the same time, still diving into this on a daily basis. Like, it's hard. It adds up. It's a marathon. So even after all this delusion, even after all this initial success, even after all these steps, you have to figure out how to then take that and just keep fucking moving no matter what. Because like I said, startups die whenever they stop moving, right? It's like a shark. If a shark stops moving, it just starts sinking. And same thing with startups. Like you have to keep executing, have to keep moving, because that's when you start to die. And so it's this constant, like that leads to a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. So it's like, how do you like focus on your health, to, like extend all of that? And you have to find a way to like keep this like sustainable and keep it running for a while. And so I would say that would be like kind of like how the initial like 6 months would go in my head is like, how do I build up conviction enough in a problem to go after it? How do I find people who care enough about me care enough about the problem about it to like build this stuff with them? And then how do I build like a system and scale to like, or a system for myself to like keep working on this for however long I need to and keep it sustainable? Because this stuff is so tiring and so stressful that like you have to have some way to like have a healthy life to keep sustaining that. So that would be like my kind of like recap if I had to start a company all over again.
Anish, dude, thank you so much for the conversation. I think you talked about a lot of interesting things. That's awesome.